Hey guys, it's Saf coming at you with another Raid Shadow Legends video. Today we have the patch 6.3 breakdown. We're going to be looking at the official patch notes and also any unofficial patch notes they didn't tell you about in the main official patch notes. We're going to look through first the official patch notes. We're going to look at all the big things that have come in this patch. Obviously, we've got new champions that came out today. We also have the Sand Devil and we have a bunch of other things to talk about. So, without further ado, let's get going. I'm probably going to do a video tomorrow on all of the Artifact Ascension, my opinion in terms of what the situation is with it. Is it good? Is it bad? I've been waiting to see how it lands after about a week, after people have had a chance to do the higher stages. It seems to be a lot more beatable than originally thought from the test server content creators original coming out with it, even with some non-pay to win strategies as well. We are still working on different tools to try and speed tune the boss, but it is plausible. We're going to look at all the details of this later on. The main thing here is we also added a new advanced quest that is related to Artifact Ascension. Now, this has caused quite a lot of stir in the community, and I do kind of agree it's a little bit shady to put it in, but at the same time, it's not the end of the world. You can go farm a lower stage of the boss in the new Sand Devil's Necropolis, get yourself some of the lesser oil and be done with it. You'll lose about, half the refills quality, but it is not much more than having to go and do 3 dungeons and get 3 artifacts out as well. That is an equivalent energy drain from that advanced quest. It's more energy lost, I agree. For me, it's not a hill that I want to die on here. Doom Tower Secret Rooms reward change. I dislike this change heavily to the point where I'll be honest, once I've got a champion, I am never going to be doing a normal secret room tower again. Rare fragments for an account like mine, which is pretty much, late to end game. We're not super end game, but we're late to end game. I have no use for rare fragments. It is totally a pointless change. They should have put in something like some soul coins, maybe some other forged materials like rarity up charms, something else in there, because simply having a bit of the rare forged materials in normal, and then when we look at hard, in which I've only just got Vassal of the Seal, so I've got a long way to go yet. I've got at least 9 months. I'm not too stressed about that. For me now, even the hard top is not worth it. 30 of the Dark Fae fragments in this rotation, for example, is about the same as me using 1 day or 2 days of my silver keys. It's not substantial enough. This change to me, it basically makes secret rooms pointless after you get the champions, and it also kind of makes me not even bother building some of the difficult secret rooms like the rare champions, because why is there a risk? Why is there a rush? I'm going to finish Krakow next rotation. I will not touch a normal secret room. This needs to change in my opinion. We need to have more rewards than just a little bit of the sort of boss materials. Then we get a daily login reward change. They are going to change it from champions now. Clearly they've got bored of creating new pointless champions for us to get after 4 months and 2 months. And we're going to get some soul stones. I actually quite like this change. I think a tier 2 soul stone every month was one of the recommendations I had when we were looking at the sort of Iron Twins rewards. I basically said we needed to throw in more guaranteed stones in different places of the game. This is one of those changes I think is actually quite good. We're going to get 5 tier 1 and 1 tier 2 a month. Brilliant. Great change. I like this. Auto climb mode in Doom Tower broke the game for about a week, maybe a little bit less, but it is now fixed and it's actually quite a good addition. It kind of makes sense. You could do it already in RSL Helper using the effective resources. That's how I used to do it, but that's one less reason I need to boot up RSL Helper now. Great idea. We're going to look at personal tiers in the unofficial patch notes. I've got the exact breakdown of what they've changed. We've got some new avatars based on the new OP Void legendaries. That's pretty cool. The festive decorations are back. There's a little bit of a snowball fight going on. I pretty much like it. We're going to look at the champion rebalance, multipliers in the unofficial patch notes. But just to talk about these champions a little bit, Pixniel now kind of loses a little bit of a niche because she did actually hit quite hard in Clan Boss with his 5 attacks at random. She's now a decent AoE nuker. 100% freeze, which is a decent champion change. She is probably now pretty much a hard counter to Tormin. The only problem is Tormin has not been in the meta pretty much for the last 6 months with all the blessings and all the different things coming out now. Tormin is just not a champion that you use. So this change is just a little bit too late. The other thing to note as well is whilst they were doing these changes, they could have taken away some of the books from the A1 and the A3. I mean, it's still an atrocious amount of legendary books. I think it's like 18. It's way too many. That should have changed here. Bellinor has gone to an AoE. They have changed his multiplier. I thought they would. They would have had to have done it because they've changed it to an AoE from a single target. The A4, the sort of partnership attack with Xavier, also is a change to his damage profile because it's changed the skill. So we're going to have a look at that in the unofficial patch notes to be more detailed. But overall, I think you basically have traded his value in Clan Boss to make him more utility-wise in every other aspect of the game. So if you were running Bellinor in your Bat Eater team, he's going to be down around about 26% damage. Alika now becomes a sort of, was it a 2-turn when booked? She's basically more like a basher, but she isn't void affinity, so bash is still going to be better. I don't really see the point in this change. Alika for me is all about her A1 and A2 damage. She is pretty hard hitting damage. And the same thing for Crit Witch. Not an awful lot has changed. They've made her 3 attacks at random, but they've decreased her multiplier as a result. Overall, on a single target, it's a net damage increase, and I suppose you hit more champions. It's not the end of the world. The A3 now actually does make more sense because you'll be able to do a lot more damage generally because most of the time the enemies are slower than your champion unless you're super high doom tower. So this should hit a lot harder. Now we've got an armada of bullet point changes here. So we're going to just have a quick little run through to see if there's anything of note to discuss. Firstly, this whole silver spent notification is not a quality of life change. I don't really need to see that. Unless that was going to tell me it's going to cost you silver of X amount, it tells me nothing. It's such a pointless change. It just makes me even more depressed about how much silver I've just lost trying to get a 16. So I'm not really sure the value of that. I actually don't like this automatic scroll into the highest dungeon because I keep having to scroll back to where I want to go. Really, it should remember the last dungeon that I hit, a bit like campaign, where it would basically instant take you to the last stage that you run. Having to always go down and then scroll my way up is a bit more annoying than what it was before, where I could have to scroll down. My personal opinion. I'm not too fussed about it though. Some pretty important bug fixes here. They finally fixed Mighty Uko for Hydra, so he'll be much better now against the Head of Wrath. We've got some visual bug changes here with specific champions, I guess, that has been fixed. They fixed a bug that caused the Fearsome Presence Mastery to not increase sheep. I wouldn't categorize this as a bug. It just never worked in the first place. Now, whether or not they intended it for it to work, that's different. But in terms of the way that the code was working, the code itself wasn't bugged. The code itself didn't support that particular effect. They've now added that effect into the game code. Now it works. So that's actually more of a change rather than a bug fix, in my opinion. And it's the same thing for the Deterrence Mastery. That will now work. It's actually quite a big change. Effectively, you're going to get 5% more chance at level 1. So it's almost doubling the benefit. So it's potentially something you might want to consider if you're not caring about the resist or the accuracy and you're not going down the offense tree. Whether or not people will start indexing into it, I don't know. Fixed a bug that caused Whisper to increase their attack after attacking when Charged Assault was used. This is a big change for Whisper if you use her in your teams. If her A2 is attacking a target with Weaken, she 100% ignores defense, full of it, all of it. But the problem she would do is she would buff herself after she did the attack. So you always had like a weaker version of that A2 if she didn't have someone else giving her increased attack buff. Well, now she's going to do it herself. Basically, on that A2 is pretty good. She's still a bit niche in the sense because she constantly can give herself extra turns. So in clan boss scenarios, there's very few clan boss teams that can support her. But it is now a good change. It bug fixes that ability, so at least she will do a lot more damage on the A2. And we got some different other bug fixes. They finally made Chancellor Yasmin not use her Lull Enchant by default if there's nothing to cleanse. Makes sense because that skill just does nothing then. So that's a good change. I don't think she's actually a viable option for the new Sand Devil because 4-turn cooldown is just too long. So that is pretty much it for the patch notes. I think there's a lot in this patch. There's a lot to digest. There's a new dungeon. There's new Artifact Ascension. We've got loads of new champions. Let's jump over to the unofficial patch notes and go through this in more detail. So with the unofficial patch notes, we basically look at the game code, determining anything that they haven't really told you about in the official patch notes. As with every patch note breakdown, I do put a disclaimer here to say this isn't official playroom notes. This is me interpreting the game sort of static information. It's not really data mining in the sense I'm not hacking the game. I'm just reading the game code, reading the game information, assessing it with my knowledge of how the game works and breaking it down in these patch notes. They're pretty much accurate because it all come from the game code, but it obviously is subject to change and my interpretation. So let's just talk about some general changes first. As I mentioned in the official part, Sheep is now correctly working with masteries. Another interesting change of masteries they haven't told you about here is Blood Shield and Bloodthirst masteries will no longer work with boss minions. So you can't kill a Spiderling or an Ice Golem ally or one of the minions of the Iragoth, the Eternal Dragon, and get that shield from Blood Shield anymore. So that's something to keep in mind. I don't particularly know why we've made this change or whether it has any impact, but if you have been using a strategy that relies on boss minion killing, be careful, it probably won't work anymore. And finally, the other change here that I want to talk about is Phantom Touch has now changed to fixed damage. So there are two types of damage in this game. You have fixed damage, something like a bomb, which is going to do a 0% calculated damage every single time consistently. It doesn't change. It's always going to be that number. The other type of damage is variable damage, which is more typical and common of all skills. It can roll up to plus 10% or down to minus 10% of the calculated damage. So you have like a 20% damage range. Now, Phantom Touch was on that variable range, which means it was inconsistent in terms of how much damage your Phantom Touch would do. We know that Phantom Touch is 5 times attack times with 30% ignore defense. Well, now it's going to do fixed damage, consistent damage. So it's actually probably a buff. It's a lot less variable. I think it's a good change, but you will now notice Phantom Touch is more consistent in terms of damage output. Let's talk about personal clan versus clan tier changes. As they alluded to, they have taken sort of a population out of tier 1 and moved it into tier 2 and tier 6. So tier 1 now becomes 80% instead of 85%. Tier 2 has become from 5% to 9%, and tier 6 is now 1% going up to 2%. So what that basically means, if you were sort of on the border last time of hitting tier 6, you got yourself 400,000 points. There used to be a scenario where you're sitting there thinking, have I got enough to make sure that I get to tier 6 next time? But the way that personal clan versus clan placement works, the placement is based on your previous performance in the previous clan versus clan tournament. So if you did 500,000 in the last tournament, then likelihood is you're going to be placed in tier 6 in this tournament, even if you don't put 500,000 points in this tournament. You obviously will then lose your placement for the next one, and so on and so forth. It's actually quite a bad system in my opinion, because you always have this thing of you can't skip one, you can't take a break. It's actually quite a stressful environment, which is why there was a lot of uproar when they announced 3 back-to-back, because it would effectively mean you either had to commit to all 3 and probably spend a lot of money, or not, and then you're already down 2 clan versus clan windows, because you're going to have to basically overdo your points in the next window to recover your placement tier. For me, it should be just as simple as if you do 400,000 points, you're in tier 6, you get your tier 6 rewards for that clan versus clan, and the next time you come in, you've got to do 400,000 points. None of this tier placement thing, I feel like, is just messy and it's not really friendly. But in the meantime, what this basically means, if you hit 400,000 points, you're probably going to be in tier 6 now, where before it was a bit of a, maybe I need to push another 20,000 points, because it could variable. It's based on population, not points. It is based on whether or not the top 2%, what the base of that 2%, you're above that number. If you're above that number, you're in the top 2%, you're in tier 6. If you're not, even if you hit 400,000 points, you might not be in tier 6. Now let's talk about the new dungeon, Al-Naima, the Sand Devil. I've got his skill multipliers here. We're going to look at that first, then we're going to look at different mechanics and different strategies, and also the analytics in terms of which dungeons are the most efficient to farm and what you should be putting your energy into. So firstly, his A1, the one that does the debuffs, is a bog standard 3 times attack. These are kind of like the multipliers that most bosses in the game have. All of the Doom Tower bosses tend to have 3 times attack. His A2 is the one that heals himself, also is based on sort of debuff counters. The way it works, he starts with a 10 times multiplier. For every single debuff you have on him, it reduces it by 0.5 multiplier. So it basically means 5% reduction per debuff, so you can get it down to a 5 times attack multiplier with 10 debuffs out there. It's still quite high, but that's why debuffs are very impactful. You're basically halving the damage output here. The heal that he does is going to be based on the total sum of the destroyed HP on your team. So if you have no destroyed max HP on your team, then he doesn't heal at all. It is no multiplier, it's just a sum. And then finally, the A3 is based on levels. So if he is less than 150 level, it's 3 times attack. If he's 150 to 250, he's 6 times attack. And then if he is 250 plus, it is 10 times attack. This is the one that ignores defense. It ignores everything. So it basically means if you're kind of like lower stages, he's probably not going to hurt that hard. If he's higher stages, he's going to one-shot you. We kind of knew this already, but that is the numbers. A few things to note here. The passive will always cleanse a protected sleep. So one thing I wanted to test when he came in was Marquise. Marquise provides a sleep that cannot be removed. He will remove that sleep even on his passive slumber counter. So you cannot use any sort of protected sleep, but you can use other protected debuffs. He won't cleanse that Morrigan heal reduction. He probably won't cleanse the Gnishak poisons either, but trying to activate those poisons, considering he needs to be asleep and the bomb needs to activate, seems to be quite difficult. He also has a hidden passive like many bosses in this game, which is really frustrating for me. This is a passive that exists on a lot of bosses that are not actually described in the skills or in the bio, but he will reduce poison damage by 90%. It's really frustrating because players don't know about it and they think poisons might do damage. Naturally, it doesn't. This should be exposed in the gameplay room if you're watching this video. Please add it in so people know that this passive is on the boss. So in terms of the rewards out of the Sand Devil, obviously we know we're going to get oil at various stages. We also get a chance to get Ancient Shards. So at every single stage, there is a 0.5% chance that you will get an Ancient Shard instead of oil. Even on the first 9 stages, which actually is coded as 100%, it's not coded as 100%. Therefore, you've got a 0.5% chance. So even though the stages tool says it's always going to be oil, it's not going to be oil and a shard. It could be one or the other. After stage 19, the chance to get each oil is equally split between the 3 types. So you have a 33.5% chance to get a tier 1, a lesser oil. Then it's 33% chance for a greater, or a 33% chance for a superior oil. In previous stages before 19, it's more variable. It's not consistently split amongst the 3. Farming the middle stages of this boss is going to be really inefficient, but farming the early or the later stages is going to be far superior. Let me show you exactly what I mean. So I've basically data mined out all of the different stage information. We've got the energy cost down the middle here, and we also have the amount of runs you can do per refill. And we've then taken the average return of the potion in question from that dungeon. So for example, if it's stage 7, I think it can go 8, 9, or 10, or 7, 8, or 9, something of that nature. We add them together, divide them with 3. That gives us the average amount of potions we're going to get per run. And then, of course, we need to take into account the chance that we're going to get that particular potion. So for stages 1 to 9, the only thing we can get is lesser potions, or we can get that 0.5% chance to get the Ancient Shard. So it basically means we have a 99.5% chance to get a lesser oil. And then obviously from stage 10 to around about stage 16 here, we get either the lesser or the greater oil. And from stage 17 onwards is when we can start getting the superior oils. But as I mentioned, it's not equal until we hit stage 20 that you're going to get these rewards. They can change. There's a lot more heavy emphasis on this lesser oil. So what this basically means, when we map it out, we work out a oil per energy and an oil per refill kind of yield. So at stage 7, being the best stage here, we get a 0.746 oil per energy. Now, obviously, you can't get half an oil pot. This is an average number, but it basically tells us per refill, we're going to get around about 97 oils from one refill of stage 7. But notice, stage 11 is not a bad option. You do sacrifice a little bit of your lesser oil efficiency, but you will have a very small chance, a 0.02 oil per energy, or on average around about 2 greater oils per run of refills. What this basically means, you're sacrificing one of your lesser oils for one of the greater oils instead. So obviously it's going to be more than 2.5, but on average, it's going to be about 3 here. You can see quite clearly that until you start getting to the higher stages, these sort of middle stages are not very efficient. You're always sacrificing something. You know, we're down 15 lesser oil if we're running at stage 13 to get 3 greater oil. It's probably not worth it. You're much better off just sort of min-maxing and going for stage 7 and getting as much lesser oil, or going much higher to get the higher oils that you want. When we look at the higher stages here, you basically can't get more than 11 oil from stage 14 onwards. So there's no value in kind of farming 20 for more lesser oil, but the value comes with the greater and the superior. We can see that the greater oil starts off really low and then eventually it gets to around about 0.13 oil per energy, which is around about 15 or 17 per refill at stage 23. Stage 24 is the best for greater oil. And then for superior oil, we're getting 0.066 or 7.92 per energy refill and about 6.93 for 23 and 24. So 24 is obviously the best for greater. 25 is about 1 extra oil per refill for the superior on 25. So 25 does have a bit of an impact. 7 is going to be the best one for lesser oil. I did see a chart, I think the Aftershock group put out, but that didn't take into account that these odds per run were in question. I think they just looked at the sort of video that Player put out there and worked out based on the averages. They didn't take into account the actual sort of split rolls between each different oil, and that is quite important. It doesn't necessarily change the stage in which you farm, but it will change the amount of oil per energy you can actually get for the greater and the superior and even the lesser oils. So that means stage 7 is the best lesser oil farming stage by quite a margin. You'll get around about 97.01 per refill. Stage 24 is the best for greater and stage 25 is the best for superior. You should probably not even bother trying to farm greater or superior if you cannot get to stage 20, at least stage 20. It's not worth it. You might as well just wait at sort of level 2 Ascension until they either release more champions, rebalance the dungeon, or you get more different teams, or there's more strategies that come out. You might as well just save your energy because you'll be wasting energy and running inefficiently. Those are the 3 stages I'd recommend farming. So if we have a look at those 3 stages, we can see the stats vary quite significantly. Stage 7 is pretty much, I would say, for most late to end games, an easy farm, and for most early to mid games, achievable numbers. We've got about 180 speed, 2.9k defense, and we're looking at somewhere around 200 accuracy required. That's probably around about what people are running for stage 20 to 25 already. So stage 7 feels like a pretty straightforward farm. It shouldn't block you from doing that advanced quest. You should be able to get some less oil out of that dungeon. Stage 24 and stage 25 is a big step up. We're seeing 17,000 attack, 13,000 defense. You're going to need something in the region of 500 accuracy. If you want to resist things, you're going to need 700 resistance. It's just way too high. He's at 265 speed. Keep in mind, he also fills his turn meter by 50%. It's just crazy numbers. So stage 24, stage 25 is going to be quite difficult for a lot of players unless they have your Acrisias, your ninjas, or your unkillable team setup that takes about 6 minutes or 5 minutes. So those are the different options in terms of the stats. You can get all of those stats on the stages tool on hellhades.com. Free account, you don't need to pay anything. All of the stats of all the bosses of all the different stages will be available on there, including the rewards. What is my recommended strategy for Alnaimer? Farm stage 7, find the pieces that you think are good on your account and ascend them to rank 1. Once you have done that a lot and you've built up a little bit of a backlog of different artifacts, that's probably going to take you a month or 2, I'd have thought. Then you can start looking at teams to farm 24, 25. Maybe you pull like a Noct, that's on a times 10 tomorrow. Maybe you pull a better champion for it. Maybe you pull a Kaimar. Maybe you pull an Acrisia. Who knows? Maybe they rebalance the stats, but you have time to basically wait for the stage 24, stage 25 team, and then you can work on upgrading to a higher Ascension level. But you're going to need more lesser oil probably in the early days of this than anything else. Just farm stage 7. Don't give yourself a headache. So let's talk about Artifact Ascension in a little bit more detail. There is no biases or weightings towards which artifact stat you get when you ascend. It is equal based on the possible rolls on the slot. So if you've got a top row piece which can roll any of the 3 flat stats, it's a 33.33% chance you're going to get one of them. It's a 1 in 3 chance. It's equal. The stat game appears to be relatively linear, unlike Artifact upgrading where the higher you go, the 12, we all know the jump between 12 and 16 is quite significant, and each milestone is quite significant. You don't get that here. It's relatively linear increase as you go, so you can get 60 to 70% of your stats at rank 4 and not require those superior oils. So in terms of the stats you do gain from the Artifact Ascension, the green column here is basically the cap of the 6-star fully ascended number that you're going to get. So we get 20% crit damage, 10% crit rate, 29, I don't know why we ended up on 29, not 30. Accuracy and resistance, 12 speed, attack is 20%, defense is 20%, and then we get about 1200 HP and 80 of the flat stats. So obviously attack percentage here is going to be more valuable than the flat stat. Makes sense, especially if you've got higher base attack, it's going to be a big difference. These stats I think are pretty decent. I don't think any of these stats are earth-shatteringly crazy that it's going to be, insanely broken. I still think empowerment is a stronger stat burst than Artifact Ascension here. If we look at someone like a Baron who has quite a high base attack, if you have a perfectly rolled Baron with attack percentage on 2 of the bottom row, with crit damage gloves, with attack on the top, he's going to gain around about 800 attack and 20% crit damage, which is a lot of primary stat, but we're not exactly talking, 10% crit rate, 30% crit damage, 10 or 15 additional speed that he could get from a +4 empowerment. The 5-star cap's lower, but it's, again, relatively linear. So whatever you had at 5-star awaken on a 6-star is going to be what you're going to get around about on a 5-star awaken. So there's not that much difference. I think it's quite a fair system. It doesn't seem to punish lower ascendancy too much. Although I would say there's not much value in ascending 4-star gear. 5-star maybe if they're pretty good gear. 6-star is where a lot of people will put their focus. So one thing I wanted to actually check was how much additional primary stat we would get versus the Ascension bonus to see if there was any sort of discrepancies between is there one particular Ascension stat that is better or worse? Now what we find here is if we compare like a flat helm, we'll get 4080 HP. We're going to get about 1224 HP from the Ascension. That is 30% of the primary stat. And for the 20%, sort of the percentage stats, we're going to get about 33%. Now, when we compare that to the lesser numbers here, accuracy and resistance is about 30% as well. But the key thing that stood out for me was crit rate. With crit damage, we're going to get about 25% of the primary stat, but crit rate only gets 17% of the Ascension stat. Speed, you're getting about 27%. So what I'm trying to basically show here, crit rate is actually the worst and least desirable Ascension stat for you to get on your gloves. You'd be much better off getting 20% crit damage and finding the additional crit rate, the 10%, elsewhere. Why? Because a single 6-star high roll is about 7%. So you need basically one single roll on a crit rate, whereas with crit damage, you're going to need 2. You can save yourself a substat roll if you were to go for the crit damage. So something to keep in mind, that crit rate is actually a worse Ascension stat than crit damage and other stats by quite a big margin. So in terms of the cost requirements for this Ascension, how much energy is this going to take? Well, if we take the best average rates from the previous sort of sheet that we looked at in terms of the best oil return per energy, we can map out the individual costs of each upgrade in this chart and gives us a bit of an estimation. Now, it's not going to be perfect because obviously you will get potentially greater oil on your way to getting the amount averages for your lesser oil and various different other mathematical calculations, but it'll give you a good ballpark figure. So if we look at a 4-star, we need 30 lesser and 40 lesser to get 1 and 2, and then we need 10 and 15 greater. That is going to be a total of 275 energy on average you need to use if we were to farm stage 7 for all of our lesser and stage 24 for all of our greater. Now, obviously, you could end up getting lesser or superior on that stage 24 farm as well. That's why I'm saying it's not going to be exactly 275 energy, but on average. Now, if we look at 5-star, it goes up quite a bit to 912. Why? Because we're adding the superior requirement. So we need to farm stage 25 here for maximum efficiency. That is still going to require, though, mostly stage 24 farming at 543 energy. And then if we want to fully max out a 6-star artifact, we need around about 1670 total energy. Here, that is going to be 188 for the 60 and the 80, 1 and 2. This is why I was saying 1 and 2 will give you around about 30% of your stats. There's no harm in going around and just farming stage 7, getting everything up to 1 or 2 stars awakened, and then work your way up higher, because that is going to make a big difference here. Even if you only do the greater, that is around about half of the total amount of energy you need to commit. So you could get yourself up to 60-70% of the Ascension stat bonus that you're going to get here and work on this superior oil over time. But it's going to be, that's kind of the cost related here. It is a bit of an energy drain, but you are getting a benefit from it. So you can choose whether or not you want to put that energy in there. I do think the lesser oil is a pretty good low investment for you to figure out which pieces are worth keeping to begin with, because you need to roll the right Ascension stat first. Now let's go through some updated champions and new champions. As I mentioned, Bellinor is now an AoE. He goes from a 5.7 attack to a 4.2 attack. It's still a godlike AoE nuke. It is still pretty good. It is on the ethos tier of damage. It's nothing super crazy, but it's pretty strong. The other thing to note about this change, because his A4, his joint attack, is now based on his A3, it uses the A3 damage multiplier of 6.8. So actually his joint attack with Xavier goes from average to godlike. Pretty big change. Cripwitch, no changes to the base stats. The A2 goes from a 3 times attack times 2 to a 2.2 times attack times 3 plus 15% ignore defense. It was already godlike before. I think it stays the same as godlike when you're hitting the single target. It's weak when you hit one target. naturally because it's random. Pixniel, her change on her A3 is now AoE. It was weak before. It used to be godlike when it hit one target because it's 5 attacks. It goes from 2 times attack times 5, effectively a 10 times multiplier, to a 4.6 times attack. So it's now a strong ability because her base attack is relatively low. So it's a decent AoE nuke with 100% freeze. Let's talk about the new champions. The Nutcracker, probably the strongest AoE nuker for Arena outside of Baron. If you haven't got a Baron, he's probably going to be the one you go to. He can ignore Stone Skin. He is what Aileel should be. If you are thinking about going for 110 voids tomorrow on Aileel, do not bother. It's a waste of time. Aileel has already been power crept within 2 months of him being out by this Georgid, the Breaker, or whatever you call him, the Nutcracker. His damage should be what Aileel should be, to the extent that his A3 is almost double the amount of damage that Aileel's single target nuke can do. He also ignores more effects than Aileel. He has Helm Smash on his passive. He gives himself unkillable. He gets extra turn. I know Aileel can give himself Stone Skin, but it's just not the same. So what do we got with this guy? 1608 base attack, very high. 103 base speed, pretty good. A1 is a 1.7 times attack times 2. It's godlike. A2 is a 4 times attack. It's godlike. And A3, surprise, surprise, is a 5.7 times attack. It is godlike. All of these assume you're going to roll the Helm Smasher passive that he has, which ignores 50% defense. And it all assumes you've got lethal in here as well. Now, the A1 is like Fushan's ability, the way it's coded. He can keep A1ing over and over and over again if he keeps rolling the 30% chance. We could see little sort of GIF clips of the Nutcracker spinning to winning and just doing some silly numbers. But if you pull him, he's a very, very, very strong damage dealer. He is up there with the top damage dealers in the game. He will be able to cut through a lower plat, probably high-end gold 5, gold 4 to gold 3 defenses in Tag Team Arena. He'll be able to cut through some of those defenses quite comfortably. I don't know whether he's got enough to be able to deal with the super high end of Platinum, where, to be honest, champions, buffs, and effects are more important than damage. I don't really think you can out-damage the top plat these days. Next up, we've got Tremaria. It's another Void Legendary. Looks freaking awesome, but shouldn't be Void Legendary. It doesn't do enough. It is not a damage-dealing champion. 892 base attack. All her attacks are weak, but she does do a lot of turn meter manipulation and cleansing for a better part. She will be able to keep your team rocking pretty comfortably, but I just don't see what really contributes to her being a Void Legendary, if I'm being honest. Next up, we've got one of the Ukrainian Void Legendaries that have been added, based on the Ukrainian lore. And I don't know particularly in detail kind of what it's based upon, but it's cool that we're getting some heritage and more sort of, it's not just a generic legendary champion being added to the game. It means something. Now, Marichka is more of a support champion. She doesn't really do a lot of damage, although she does have the ability to create that joint attack, especially paired with Taras. That joint attack is quite strong because Taras will use his A2, which means he's going to put 2 turn stuns out on people she A1s, which could be quite frustrating. What she's very good at is cleansing max HP lost in the dungeons. Great for carrying a team. The revive element of her ability has no cooldown. So if she dies, she revives everyone. If you revive her again, she revives everyone again. There's no cooldown on the actual revive component, only on the block damage. If someone tries to bomb your team, she's going to block the damage. So she is a counter to bomb teams. She's a very, very strong champion on her own. If I'm being honest, on her own, she's very strong. But her A1 is a 3.5 times attack average. It's not a damaging ability in any sense. She's a support champion. Now comes to Taras, the probably broken, if I'm being honest. We did have some discussions in the Elite chat in Hellhades Discord about whether or not he replaces Seer. He doesn't truly replace Seer because Seer is based on enemy max HP, so the harder the enemy, the easier it becomes for Seer, and the more dominant she becomes, whereas Taras is going to be based on his own HP, so he's always going to be sort of subject to how hard you can push his gear, where Seer is just put crit damage on her, she's going to do more damage. He is HP based. He is unique in the sense that he actually is based on his HP numbers at the start of the round, not in the battle itself. One thing that I was commenting on was the fact that his passive would reduce his max HP, which means his actual damage would go down. But that's not the case. They've obviously predicted that scenario, and they've countered it with this B_HP, which basically means the HP that I have when I enter the battle. Now, his A1 is not that spectacular. It's about 0.12 times base HP. He's got a 22,305 base HP, which is quite high. It's pretty good, but it's not 30,000, 26,000. It's not at the top of the range. His A2 and his A3 is where he becomes extremely strong. His A2 is a 0.35 times base HP if the enemy's attack is higher than his. Now, his base attack is incredibly low. So in most scenarios, unless you're fighting another low attack champion, he's going to activate the second component of his ability, which is a 0.7 times base HP. And that is godlike. We are talking 200, 300, 400,000 potentially in the clan boss with this ability here, because the clan boss is always going to have more attack than him. I think if you keep him below about 2,500 attack, the Ultra Nightmare clan boss can never be reduced, even if you count in the decreased attack and you count in its passive, which can also decrease the boss's attack. Now, the A3 is where everyone was saying this is the new Seer. Not quite, but it's pretty strong. The more and more buffs you push, the more and more this gets closer to Seer, but it won't quite beat Seer in my opinion. It'll always be about half the damage of Seer. So if we look at it, it's a 0.26 times base HP. It's a pretty standard HP multiplier for an AoE. He gains 15% per buff per ally. I've basically assessed this as if he's using 15 buffs on your team. So in an arena setting, that would be around about 4, give or take 4 buffs per ally. It's a pretty reasonable amount to get if you consider a bolster, shield, maybe neck rep, passives, and different things. That will do some obscene damage. It is godlike. If you were in a situation where you were in the clan boss and you had around about 100,000 HP with about 200 to 300,000 crit damage, and you rocked up with 50 buffs, so basically 10 buffs on every ally, you're looking at millions of damage. It hits really hard. He's also quite an annoying defense stall champion. You know, if you don't kill him quickly, he's going to start reducing your champion's attack by up to half. You could end up having your attack multiplied by 50 and then multiplied by 50% again. So you would have basically double the decreased attack in your champions, and you can't really get rid of that. He will have an ability to heal himself. He extends buffs. He is a bit of a monster. I got to say, out of the two, he's much stronger and probably a lot scarier to face in the arena. Next up, we have the Fusion Champions. Riskam. There is not much to talk about this guy. He is defense-based. He's slow. He doesn't hit very hard. He is pretty much useless. I would say you're going to use him to fuse the epics and the legendary. Endalia is an interesting champion that could be used in Hydra for provoking. She's HP based, so easy to keep alive. 100 base speed is pretty good. She has one of these unique abilities where she counterattacks and then provokes and various different things, but she won't do any damage. She's 0.22 times HP on both. I know the A2 is an AoE, but they're both weak. Trumbo is interesting. He's probably the best damage option that you have available to you in this new set of epics. He's defense based at 1332. He is a double hit A1 for 1.8 times defense times 2. That's strong for an A1. But what is interesting is his A2 is godlike. This assumes that you're going to get the bonus multiplier. He basically gains 5% for every debuff you cleanse. So I've basically assumed you're going to cleanse 4 debuffs, 1 from each ally in a 4-man team. So that means you get 20% damage bonus. That puts him on the same tier as a Stultus Dragonbane or a Ragash. This is 3.9 times defense multiplier with a good base defense, but the multiplier there for removing the buffs kind of pushes him up into that, good defense-based nuker tier. He's also an ally protector, so if you're in need of a high damage ability champion that you also need an ally protector, he could transition quite nicely throughout your progression. You could use him as an ally protector early. When you don't need ally protection anymore because maybe you pulled an unkillable champion, he can become a defensive-based nuker in the arena for you. Next up, we got Morag Bronzelock. She's a dwarf, kind of crazy looking thing. She is defense-based at 1288. She again has another counterattack ability where she will counterattack when she's attacked under Strengthen. I believe this is the Strengthen champion. The problem is her damage isn't as good as Trumbo because she doesn't have that bonus multiplier. So 1.85 times defense times 2, slightly lower base defense than Trumbo, and a 3.9 times defense, but doesn't have the bonus multiplier. So she is strong on both counts. I don't really see in many cases where you can support this champion in your team, but maybe there'll be some uses for her. I don't think she's worth skipping the legendary over. Then we've got Aishma, basically Faceless's long-lost rotten twin sister with a bit of bandages / mummy, whatever you want to call her. Attack based at 1354, relatively low for an epic now these days, but still decent. Base speed of 98. A1 is a double attack, 1.9 times attack times 2, strong. She places poisons on the A1, but not a lot of poisons. Then we have the 4 times attack on the A2, strong, and then a single hit 6 times attack, A2 is also strong. All of her effects are 100%, which is nice. Unfortunately, she doesn't really pump out an awful lot of poisons. I feel like she needed more poisons in her kit to be valuable, but an average champion otherwise. I think she's okay. Next up, we got Gnishak Verminlord. He is the fusion legendary. He actually has quite a low base attack for a legendary champion. It's only 1,365. Typically, legendary champions these days are around about 1,500. So I'm actually quite surprised by that. The speed here is a 105. It's pretty good. His A1 is a 1.2 times attack times 3, which is weak, and we know he places bombs on that A1. And then we've got the A2, which is 4.6 times attack, which is strong. And the A3 is 4.5 times attack, which is also strong. His bomb multipliers are 5 times attack, but if he is proccing the opportunity on targets over 200,000 HP, it will be a 10 times attack multiplier, which is probably one of the highest bomb multipliers. I still think War Mother will probably beat him, purely because she has a higher base attack and the multiplier is only 8.5, but it will be very close. But he is a very competent bomber. Now, the only problem I think you're going to have with Gnishak is he's going to overfill the turn meter bar. So in a solo setting, as Hellhades is showing off, it's quite ideal. You don't really care about other debuffs. In a clan boss setting, you're going to have to make sure you can really sustain the primary debuffs. Otherwise, he's going to overfill and you're not going to be able to place the decreased defense and weaken again, and various other places where, you know, it might not work. Maybe there's some use for him in the Sand Devil, but I don't think you're going to be able to enable his passive because the bomb has to explode while the boss is asleep to place those protected poisons. Seems like an awful lot of, you know, perfect storm to be able to nail that. As a direct damage dealer, he's an okay direct damage dealer, but you wouldn't use him as an arena nuke or anything else like that. So I still am in a bit of the camp myself of I'm not quite sure outside of Bommel where this guy is useful. Bombs in the arena are not as good as you would think because you've got Mithrala. There's a lot of things that stop you from dying. Sure, Stone Skin will obviously multiply that, but a lot of people will just use Mithrala into it. So you can't really use him defensively. You could use him as an offense solution into a team you know has got Stone Skin, and it would be pretty strong. But you're not going to be able to activate the 10 times poisons on those because the likelihood is arena champions are not going to be over 200,000 HP, which is probably why they did it based on a fixed HP and not on if the enemy has 50% more HP than him. You can't run him squishy, so that's a bit of a problem. You will need to scale the attack number. With a 1365, that will be a bit trickier, so keep that in mind. There you go, guys. That is the end of the video. It's a pretty long one this time. I did hold it back waiting to do the release because obviously I wanted to do all the champion multipliers. I hope it was helpful. Obviously all the multipliers are on the hellhades.com website, and I will look to try and put together a visual of the most efficient Ascension stage levels of the new dungeon, so that you can use that as a sort of a cheat sheet and various different things. If you like these videos, please give it a thumbs up. I try to do them every time a patch comes out, although I think I skipped the last few champions because it was kind of released in a mid-patch window, so I might go back and do them at some point. If you want to see more videos from us, please consider subscribing to the channel, hit that bell notification, and any new video will be released will come straight into your feed. I will be streaming tonight on this channel on YouTube. It's Thursdays and Mondays when I stream at around about 8 p.m. UK time, which at the end of this recording, it's around about 5 o'clock here. We'll probably be in about 3 hours. You probably will see it in less than 2, 8 p.m. UK time. Come hang out if you want some questions answered. I don't know what we're going to be doing tonight. We'll probably be trying to theory craft some more Sand Devil teams and options for higher end because I'm looking to now get into stage 24 and 25. We might do some Hydra and various different things. We will probably talk about the new champions as well. But with that said, guys, I'll catch you in the next video.